What's up, everybody? Thanks for hanging out with us today. If you are listening / watching this episode anytime soon after it gets released, then you know exactly what we're talking about. And you know, and you have felt what it's like to live through the past few months and try to figure out what in the world to do in the midst of this. And so we just wanted to have some really specific conversations about, now that we're kind of at the tail end maybe of some of the sheltering in places, and some churches are trying to figure out what transitioning back to programming and reentry looks like. We wanted to start having some conversations about just some of the realities and the struggles and the tensions when it comes to all of these different conversations. So my name is Brett, and I'm so excited that you're joining us for this conversation today. And I'm really happy to have a few of my good friends joining me today from their own shelters and places. We have my friend Candace.
Hey.
And we've got Charlie.
Hey, friends.
And we have the one and only Thomas, Chef Shunas. Chef.
Hey, everybody.
How's it going, Chef?
It's going all right. A little stir crazy, but it's going okay.
Yeah. How are you all doing? So, Candace, you said day 70. Is that an accurate number?
I don't know. A friend of mine posts daily updates every day, and I saw her Insta story today, and it said 70. I'm just going by what she posts. Wow. So it could be. I don't know.
So it's been, literally since the last time that we've been in a room together. It has been months. Conference has happened, all sorts of different things. People have finished e-schools, and all sorts of different things have happened since we've actually all been in the same room together, which is wild and sad, and all sorts of things. Well, today on this episode, we are going to be talking about this idea of leading and training volunteers to re-engage after a crisis. So crisis can be a lot of different things. Really, what we're talking about today could fit into a lot of different scenarios, but obviously we're talking a lot in detail about what we've been through the last few months and potentially what the next few months could look like, because I'm not sure what the next few months are going to look like, and I'm assuming everybody else is kind of up in the air with that too. But before we jump into the conversation, I do want to be clear that what we're not saying is that leaders haven't and shouldn't have been already engaging in your ministry or with your students in the midst of the past few months. But as we start talking about phases and reentry and transitioning back into some programming, there are absolutely some unique ways that we're probably looking at in our ministries in order to get our volunteers re-engaged kind of for this new season of ministry. So that's going to be the focus of our conversation and what we're talking about today. But the first thing I would love to pick your brains on and get your thoughts is what you feel like some of the biggest challenges or tensions have been when it comes to volunteers during this season of ministry and just this season of life in general.
So I would say probably one of the biggest challenges is just volunteers being clear about what their expectations are right now. Because, some leaders might have laid it out for what it looks like in real life to be engaged. And not that this isn't real life, but just like the normal ministry life. Yeah, in person. That's much better. In person. But I don't know that leaders have ever thought through what is our pandemic plan, I know I never thought through what is my pandemic plan when I was serving as a youth leader. Yeah. So that's probably been a big challenge, is just for volunteers to just be clear on what's expected of them in the season.
That's good.
I think just not being together regularly is one of the biggest challenges. You realize how much work gets done just inside conversations and saying hello and checking in with people, and the little bits of vision you can cast by celebrating something that happened or remembering a birthday, or I saw that Instagram post. All of those are deposits into your culture, and those just happen because we cross paths, and now to cross paths, we've got to set up a time. We've got to know how to run Zoom, we've got to know how to send an invite, which I've learned, over the past 70 days or whatever it is. So it's just, you become aware of just how much happens just simply by being together.
That's good. What do you think, Charlie? What are some of the challenges, tensions when it comes to how we've handled volunteers in the midst of this?
I don't know that we equipped volunteers to lead as relationally as they need to be leading right now. And I think this time away from each other, like Chef was saying, just in casual conversations, it has really exposed a lot of holes in how we've trained leaders. My co-leader, my small group co-leader, she's crumbled, right? She has crumbled in the midst of this, because I think it is the conversations and the passing. It's not sitting across from a student. And she has literally just called me like, okay, just tell me what I need to do. Tell me what I need to do. Instead of just innately knowing how to love someone that they're not seeing every week.
Yeah. And I think that, digital fatigue and just the lack of motivation that comes from seeing your students and your group just drop in engagement. I mean, I know that's been true. I've been hearing that from student pastors all over the place. That's true of my group too, where, I had most of my group on the first couple of, Zoom small group meetings. And now, there's, just a few of them are showing up. And so, their engagement in, what we might consider the digital programming has gone down. And sometimes that takes a toll on our motivation and the energy that we have to put, to put into that. I think there's a real piece of that. I know that I've even felt as a volunteer.
And I think also with that, when you're connecting with them, if you're doing some sort of, Zoom or video conversation, if you're connecting with them and you only see their ceiling or their top of their forehead, right? And it makes you as a leader, right? There you go, Brett.
This is all my boys. This is all my boys. Pretty much every group.
Yeah. And if you only see that part of them, then you're thinking, well, is this what you've been feeling you automatically assume that this is what they're feeling about being there. And it's like, okay, is this what you've been feeling the entire time? And it's kind of like, okay, I thought maybe we were getting somewhere, maybe not. I don't really know how to take your connection to our group.
It's the equivalent of like if you're in couches or chairs, all of them are just hiding behind the chair and just barely peeking over during normal group time. It's like, how is that going to be beneficial to group time? But that's what digital Zoom looks like right now.
Exactly.
Like, oh boy.
Totally.
All right. So with those challenges and tensions in mind, what do you think are some things that we probably should have been doing, since this started, but maybe if we haven't been doing, we should probably start doing? So when it comes to, taking care of our volunteers, all of those kind of pieces, continuing that healthy volunteer culture, like Chef is talking about, that sometimes just happens naturally in the gatherings that we have. What should we have been doing that maybe if we haven't, it's not too late to start. We should probably start doing it.
I think when you care for leaders, they in return become caring leaders. And I work a lot with small churches and coach a lot of small church leaders. And I know budget's a big thing right now, right? But it doesn't take a lot to bake a pan of brownies and drive it to somebody's front porch. It's just little things, even just a phone call just to say, how are you? And not talk about anything related to the ministry, right?
Yeah.
Those have been some treasured phone calls from my leader just to check in to see how I'm doing. And so there's some really great ways that you can care for your leaders so they in return can be caring leaders.
Yeah, that's good.
I think, similar to that, Charlie, when I used to run transit and we had groups directors who this was their job to reach out and, really pastor our leaders, they had coffees and lunches that they would routinely be doing. And I feel like one of the things that maybe we've let up on is still trying to reach out to them, even though it can't be in person. Just because we can't have coffee or lunch doesn't mean I can't connect with you, doesn't mean I can't ask you how you're doing and pastor you. And I think one of the dangers we fall into is we're all thinking about what's next so much and how we're going to re-engage the kids that we might have forgotten to engage our leaders and pastor them as well.
That's good.
I think Charlie and Chef pretty much hit the nail on the head with those things. I think if leaders have not already been doing those things, then I'd say today, put on your to-do list, do them. Don't put it off until tomorrow or next week because you're doing nothing but prolonging it and carrying out more time and allowing more time to pass before you actually reach out to them. And just like Charlie said, not ask them to do anything, just say, how are you doing? And I do think those go very, 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 they go very far when it comes to people just knowing that you care about them and not necessarily, just with the role that they play and how they can be impactful and helpful in the ministry.
Yeah, I'm with you, Candace. And I think that the text messages matter, the phone calls matter. Like, we need to be doing those things. But Charlie, kind of like you talked about with the brownies, those tangible things that we do make a real difference too. So we're doing these things on our Orange Students Facebook group where we kind of do these team lunch webinars every now and then. We'd love you to join one sometime. And the one that we had yesterday with Heather from California and Jeremy in South Carolina, they were sharing about some of those really practical things that they're doing, talking about putting yard signs in their leaders' yards and dropping off baskets at their houses. Like, I think those tangible things really make a difference too, along with kind of the other things we're talking about with phone calls and checking in and making sure that every time we reach out to them, it's not just ministry related, that we're actually just trying to connect with them. And I think reminding our small group leaders what they're doing, it does matter, is really important too. I know I need that reminder on a regular basis, working with middle school boys and feeling like everything I do doesn't matter, is a waste of time and is pointless. And so sometimes I need my buddy Kevin to call me and remind me and say, hey, I know it probably doesn't feel like it right now, but what you're doing matters. Showing up on Zoom, even though they all don't show up, matters. The phone calls that they might not return, the text messages that they might not give you more than a one-word response to, those matter. And sometimes as a volunteer, we just need to be reminded of those things because it doesn't always feel like what we're doing matters, even though we might know in our heads it does. Just that reminder.
Well, that's the balance in leading is like, man, this is, I mean, if you think about the phase approach and what middle schoolers need and that they need affirmed and that, and they're lonely right now and they're isolated, it's so important. But at the same time, you can't just talk about the emergency without caring for the leader in the middle of it. And that's the balance.
Yep.
So Candace, you were going to say something?
Yeah, and sometimes leaders just, like I said before, they just don't know what it is they probably should be doing. Not everybody they might have, a heart of, service, and they might love students, but they just might not be creative in the way to think of different ways to connect with students. Maybe they don't feel comfortable leaving their house at all to really drop off something or to do something. But there are other ways that they can connect with their students. Maybe even just giving them a list of different things that different ways that they can connect with students, creative ways that they can just look at this list, read something that's very, very easy, and then just do it. I think we at Orange do an amazing job of this through weekly, having the different touch points that small group leaders can use throughout different seasons. But I think it'll be great for leaders to create something, ways for them to just very, very simple, that may not even cost anything, just ways that they can connect with their students during this season.
If you're not familiar with Weekly, you can go to goweekly.com. You can check that out. There's awesome resources there for your leaders and your parents. Chef, what are you going to say?
Yeah.
Oh, Charlie, go ahead.
Charlie was up.
I'm so sorry.
I
noticed several weeks in, like 3 weeks into quarantine, my church kept giving me a lot of content, right? And then they stopped with, serving me content and started giving me ways to be connectional. And I even got postcards from my church with a stamp on them and addresses for my small group girls so that I could connect with them. And so I think there had to be a shift, in the mind of the youth worker. We got to kind of, content's not reaching them, but connection will. And so I think just kind of shifting in the way that we were taught to reach students.
I just want to stop and celebrate the fact that you created the word connectional now.
That was good.
Which I love. I don't know. Maybe that is a word and I have no idea, but it just sounds so great.
I've heard of it.
The relational connection. It's connectional.
Thank you.
It's so good. Like but I know that so many of us have had these conversations where what we say matters, the content matters, what we do from the stage or what we do on the YouTube link or what we do on Instagram, like those things matter, but they matter way more when there's a relationship, when we are being connectional. And I think that in this season, it's, what maybe is like this normally has just done this in this season. Is that, yes, what we say still matters, and it matters more when we're connectional with students, but just building those relationships and leaning into those relationships just matter so much more right now. And the more that we can create templates and just spell it out and make it so easy for our volunteers to know, hey, text your students once a week, call them every other week, send a postcard once a month, like making it as simple as possible to follow a plan, sets them up for success, I feel like.
Yeah.
I think that's huge. I think, we've been pushing the relational side of ministry for a really long time, to a group that loves to get on stage and speak and, do those sorts of things. And so I feel like this is magnified, and, I kind of feel like there's a little bit of an I told you so moment, which is fun. It's fun in some respects. It's sad in others because
Chef's made so many phone calls that's just I told you so, like, and he hangs up.
Hey, and that partner with parents thing, don't you really wish you would have tried that too? I mean, that's kind of where we are. I mean, because that is so magnified. But really back to the complicated part, and I love the fact that you were talking about giving leaders different ideas at different ways of being connectional. Let's go ahead and just keep using that word, whether it's real or not, because I think it's great. But I know here in our state, it's open, but people aren't necessarily operating that way. And it depends on really where they are. There's some people who are going to restaurants and movie theaters, though it's very few of them. But there's a lot of people who are still very uncomfortable getting out and running around. And so we have to be super cautious as we start to re-engage. Just because the state is open doesn't mean that your 60-year-old small group leader or your small group leader who has their parents, elderly parents staying in their home is comfortable with some of that stuff. So, it's going to be a complicated transition back in. And so I love that idea of, hey, here's a way to connect over the phone. It's better than nothing. Here's a way to connect. I love the stamped postcards thing, Charlie. That used to be one of my tricks, because when you hand a leader a postcard and say, you should email the kid, or you should email the kids, that would be a waste of money. You should, write to the kids. It happens sometimes, but when you put a stamp on it and you've invested in it a little bit, the leader starts to feel like, I should probably do that. And just getting mail is so much fun, for a kid, because they never get mail unless it's an advertisement or something now.
Yeah.
Right.
Or they're in 10th grade and just took the SAT and all you get are college things. I've learned that. We are covered up every day with all these different college things. But that's the first mail he's really gotten,
I did look up Connectional real quick, and I think that it really is a word. So I'm so excited now.
Oh, sweet. Let's keep using it.
Yeah. And we're kind of saying the same thing, but the more they're connected to me as their small group leader, I feel like that's what's going to bring them back and keep them connected. The YouTube links matter, the Instagram stuff, it matters what we're doing there, but that can't be what we're putting, the basket we're putting all of our eggs in.
I was talking with a leader just yesterday who in August just kicked off their youth ministry again after having been on a hiatus for 3 years, not having any kind of leadership for 3 years. And she stepped in and her husband have taken over. They just kicked off in August. And so, they're still in just infancy stages of ministry, right? When the students are developing those bonds, beginning to trust small group leaders and all of that. And she says that right before, quarantine hit, that relationships were just starting to develop, and that community was just beginning to develop. And, how you engage during COVID is critical to whether that plummets or whether that sustains and continues to climb, and how teenagers or students see you as being a support system for them when they are going through crisis, right? And I think that, however leaders might or might not have been engaged, this is a great opportunity to get re-engaged, because like Brett said, when they start coming back face to face, how they engage with you can be very different, because it's been so long since they have been face to face with someone.
Yeah.
Candace, it's what you're saying. Before all this happened, my kids were so involved in sports, and I really got to love on a couple at a time because they all weren't showing up. But I think the investment that I have been so purposeful in making in them over this time, just sending the milkshakes or the Starbucks gift card via text message at the end of their finals, I guarantee you I will have better attendance when this is over because of the way I've loved them.
Yep.
That's great.
And should something happen in their lives, sorry, Chef, but should something happen in their lives, should they, continue to journey through life and something major happens, they'll realize they can trust you because you've been there with them through so much already.
I just love that we're talking about opportunities, because though this is really a tough time, there are so many opportunities to, just because their perspectives have changed. I think, any attempt to reach out and connect with a kid is appreciated, I think. Yeah. And it's such a big deal. I also think from a ministry strategy standpoint, it's a huge opportunity because, our pastor's doing a series right now, Better For It, he calls it. But I mean, the question is, wouldn't it be a shame when all this goes back to normal that we didn't change or didn't take something new into the future? So what is that about your ministry? What is it that, what is it that's not working because you didn't, which is a question we've already asked, but what are some of the things that surprised you that did work that just need to be carried forward into, into the future? And it's such an opportunity and so much fun.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the interesting things about this to me has been that, for some people, this has absolutely felt like crisis. We've lost jobs and lost loved ones, maybe, and so much of the rhythm of our life has just been thrown upside down in not a good way. And I've had conversations with people who are on the other end of that, who this hasn't necessarily been a crisis for them. They're still secure in their, finances and their job. They're not worried about that. They've loved all the extra time that they've had either to themselves or maybe with their family, and they've been able to dive into some hobbies or get some much needed rest. People are just all over the place with what this has been for them. And so what does it look like, knowing that we've got volunteers that are probably on both sides of that? What does it look like for us to raise the bar for our volunteers that maybe haven't been so engaged, and we're encouraging them to get more engaged over the next couple months, while still being sensitive and understanding to the situation that they might be in right now? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think that the way that I would approach that would be very different based on the person. I don't know if I would necessarily across the ministry raise a bar right now of expectations for leaders, because like you said, everyone is in different places, and it isn't like everyone in the world has been experiencing a pandemic except small group leaders. It's because everyone is in so many different places. I would honestly do a pulse check, just check in with the small group leaders. And depending upon your ministry size, maybe you, a youth leader, has the ability to do that yourself, or maybe you need to reach out to your coaches to do that if your ministry is a bit bigger, or whoever the people are who oversee your small group leaders. But there needs to be some sort of pulse check in sharing with them, hey, this is what we're looking to do moving forward, and assessing how comfortable they are with that. Because some leaders won't want to show back up right now face to face, even though many churches are starting to meet face to face. Some leaders will not feel comfortable doing that. Some are like, I'm going to be there with no mask and no gloves, but some are like, hey, let's just stay on this, we're going to be right here, So I would just do a pulse check and see where they are and respect that, respect that. And if they want to continue to be engaged, but just aren't comfortable showing up, figuring out different ways for them to be involved through that. But whatever it is you're doing, just be clear, on what it is that the expectations are, what it is that the plan is, and how they can continue to serve during this time, because someone might really, really want to continue to serve, but it's just like, I don't feel like it's safe for me to be around people right now.
Yep.
Or emotionally, they can be a wreck. They could have, like you said, have had all kinds of things happening, and they just need the church to be there for them, to pastor them, and not necessarily pushing them into service.
Well, and that so much of that goes back to the conversation we had earlier about just pastoring our leaders first, and how many phone calls have we made to our leaders, and just to say, how's it going? Like, in what ways has this been a positive thing for you? And what ways has this been a negative thing for you? What I really appreciate about my student pastor, Kevin, is he'll text me sometimes and just say, hey, how can I be praying for you this week in the midst of all this?
Yeah, that's cool.
And those matter to me. And I'm able to kind of, let him know what's going on in my life. And we've got to make sure that we're doing that, like you're saying, Candace, and we know where people are individually. So we know if they're actually ready for certain things that we might be asking them to do.
One of the things that I got an email from my church I really appreciated. And as they were starting to figuring out how to go back to church, and they kind of set a date for us all the way back, into the fall, because they made the decision we're not going to do church until we can do children's and students as well. And children's and students, we're very close quarters and small group based. So it's going to be a tough one. But what they said was, here's kind of our plans. And then they asked the question, what is it going to take for you to feel safe coming back? Which I thought was a great way to do that. So maybe to do that to your leaders, to say, hey, as we move towards making plans, here's some general questions with some open opportunities to give us some feedback, is how are you feeling about coming back, on a scale from 1 to 10, what would it take from us for you to do it? And, some of the answers might be, there's nothing you can do. I'm not coming back till there's a vaccine, but you've said you care because you've asked them. Yeah. And now you also know kind of where they are, because you might be surprised at how gung-ho they are to come back, who knows, but.
And I think in those surveys, because I did one of those surveys for my son's school, and they were planning for next school year. And a lot of times in surveys, you kind of shy away from the not sure answer, not sure response.
Right.
And they had, should school open, in the fall, how comfortable would you feel sending your child back? Or would you send your child back, or something like that? And there was the yes, no, and not sure. And I was like, not sure, and that's not really too helpful, but it really, it's the truth, because there's so many things right now that are, we're just not sure.
So many variables. I mean, there could be a new story tomorrow that changes all of it,
Exactly.
Well, it's also because we're 9s, Candace. And so we're just,
I thought you were 6.
Yeah, I think I'm both.
You're a 9 when it's convenient.
I've got a lot of, I do a lot of the not sures because I'm never sure about anything.
That's funny.
Okay, so let's transition a little bit and talk about about training. We've talked a little bit about how so often we train our volunteers to be leaders in a certain setting, but maybe not in the current situation that we're in. I know some student ministries that they do a little training session every single week before youth ministry, or once a month, or once a quarter, or, we usually have some sort of rhythm when it comes to how we equip and how we train our leaders. And all of that just looks different right now. What do you think training and equipping our leaders should look like in the midst of all of this season that we're in right now, and transition conversations and everything else?
I was talking to a youth worker who was so pumped because he was able to read several books during this time. And he wanted to buy a copy of a book and send it to all their leaders, and they were going to do this big training. And I was like, dadgum, that's a waste of money, because I just don't know. I just don't know that I would read a book right now as a small group leader, because I'm already feeling like a lot of tension with my job and stress, all the things, right? And I was like, why don't you just take the time to create a training, right? Or snippet trainings based on the book. And also think about when you want to train your leaders right now, because my church was trying to do a Bible study at 6:00 for adults at Zoom, on the Zoom call, right? And I'm like, 6:00, I'm in the middle of dinner. I still have dishes. Like, I have all the things happening, right? So why don't we work with the pattern of life that our volunteers are in? There's no reason you can't do an 8:30 p.m. Zoom call right now and train your leaders. But I definitely think you have, like, as a youth worker, you have time to put together some quality training on some pieces you feel like you might have missed, right? So do that right now. Put it together. I just think buying a book for every leader in your church might be a mistake right now.
Unless it's the Bible.
Unless it's the Bible.
Good.
Yes, ma'am.
That's good.
Just got Jesus juked. Thanks, Candace.
I think that's a great idea. And I think you could offer it more than once, to your point, Charlie. Like, if you did a small training, 3 or 4 times, gives you a small group to talk to about it. The Q&A stuff is great. I mean, one of our biggest challenges with training leaders was getting them physically there.
Yeah.
Because they wouldn't show up, or,
Yep.
And now it's easier to click on a link than it is to drive to the church. So
Yep.
I think there's, again, to that opportunity thing, there's some great opportunities in recruiting. I mean, I've been so stressed. I'm not even doing it right now, but I was like, as a church leader, like these last 70 days are our prime recruiting time. Because normally in my ministry, we would start groups in a couple of weeks because we changed at the beginning of summer so we could take our kids kind of through the summer and then take them to camp right away in the fall so that those relationships got really strong. So I've been stressed thinking, what would you do to recruit? And then I thought, you know what? This may be an even better opportunity to get, some people on the phone or talk to, maybe the lead pastor on the messaging. I don't know. It's such a drastic time. It's a great opportunity to make big asks. So to say, hey, what if we devoted a Sunday to recruiting for our children and students during this time, volunteers that are going to connect with them. I think, we might be able to get a few. Some people are thinking right now, there's no chance. But I could see it happening in my last context for sure.
Well, and Chef, on your point, what if you weren't a church who had small groups, right?
Right.
And this would be a great time to start developing that because this is really shine the light on if you didn't have small groups and you, the youth worker, have been trying to reach 35 kids. So this would be a great time to even start, solidifying the role of a small group leader in your context and then recruiting them. And
that first sentence, you can get away with murder when you say, in light of these unprecedented times, we have made the decision to make a change, or we have no choice but to make a change and make it, it's again, it's a great time. It's also a good time to stop doing some things you probably should have stopped a long time ago.
Ooh, yes.
So,
Yeah. And some language that I know that I've talked about with a lot of different leaders is that idea of relational discipleship. I don't think that there's any more form of, ministry that is more effective than relational discipleship, period. That's why we talk so much about partnering with parents and, small groups and all of these different pieces. And if you're in a setting that has leaned more toward event and program heavy, this is such a great season, like you're saying, Chef, to really start shifting the culture and start having those conversations and saying, hey, we're recognizing that in the world that we live in right now, yes, programs and events, those have their place and those can still work, but we have got to start leaning more heavily into this idea of relational discipleship so that we can, even in the midst of, not being able to meet, and when people don't show up, which by the way, half your committed students weren't showing up before this happened every single week anyway. And so what were we doing before all of this hit to make sure that we were actually reaching our students on a regular basis in the first place?
I've said that it's not discipleship unless it's relational discipleship. It's just, it's just content if it's not relational, you know what I mean? And when you reduce discipleship down to things you need to know, you have lost the essence and the core of what a discipleship really is. I mean, it's information and relationship and life and development going on kind of interwoven. And with kids and students, it's parents as well and reaching all of that. And so it is such a relational thing. And if, one of the diseases of youth ministry has been this shift towards discipleship is content, discipleship can be delivered through a microphone. And though the microphone can be a very powerful tool to help discipleship happen, make no mistake about it, information comes through a microphone. Discipleship happens eyeball to eyeball, So.
All right, so let's get a little practical. I know that there are some leaders I'm already having conversations with where they're talking about, we do have our first gathering is next week, or, the church is starting to open at 40% capacity. There's all of these different things. So whether your first Sunday or first Wednesday or first gathering is in a couple weeks or it's in a couple months, it's going to happen at some point. So what do you guys think are some really practical ways that we can be preparing our volunteers for whenever that first gathering is and whatever it looks like?
We don't know what mean, some students might have been connecting, via Zoom, or whatever way you're connecting with students, but there's some who have not, and we just don't know the state that students will be in when they come back, so it might be helpful to train or equip small group leaders with different possible scenarios. Now, I know youth leaders are not psychologists, you're not, personality specialists or anything like that, but just thinking through any crisis is just thinking through what are the potential, mental states that people could be in when they come back and preparing for that. Some students, parents might push them to come to show up face to face, and they might not be comfortable, or they might be comfortable showing up, and a student who's ordinarily, normally runs up to you and gives you a hug is pretty standoffish, even down to the type of way that the small group leaders engage with students, laying out, what are our expectations when it comes to physical connection. Are you able to give a student a high five, an elbow bump, a hug, just laying those things out so that they're clear on how they can physically be in conversation with students, but also being prepared for the different places that students might be mentally, and equipping them with the resources, either conversation guides or just having plans in place for, hey, if you think a student might need extra care, let the youth leader know so that the youth leader can follow up with parents, or hey, feel free to reach out to parents and talk to them about these things, but maybe not these things, or whatever the case might be. Just have those things laid out. But I can't just help but to think about just the mental state that people are in when they all come back after a crisis.
Well, and I think it's so important, like you said, to recognize we're not mental health professionals. So that could be a great opportunity for training right there. Invite a mental health professional into a conversation, into a Zoom call with your leaders to process, hey, what are the spectrum of emotions that students might be feeling when they come, start meeting again, and how do we best handle those? That's great, Candace.
Yeah, there's a ton of content out there for free on that. I know the YS blog has a lot of stuff. I know the Orange Students has a whole packet on some of the psychological stuff that's going on. So, what if you can find a mental health professional who's willing, or you have a volunteer who is, that'd be great. But, for me, it's just like, hey, don't assume kids are going to feel the same way you do about getting back together. And just even that little bit of training, I think, matters, as opposed to just all running into the same room and thinking it happens. Just to be sensitive to the fact that, I know if my middle schooler walks out the door, I know exactly what his mom's going to tell him about, shaking hands or high-fiving, or, and, for a small group leader to assume that's going to happen would be a mistake. So
it's probably better
with a simple.
It's always better for us as the ministry leader to be the bad guy than for small group leaders to be the bad guy. So if we're clear with communication to parents and to students and everybody that, hey, we're not going to high five, or we're not going to do this, here's what we're not going to do, here's what we are going to do, then you don't have to leave it up to the small group leader to be the one who makes those decisions and then maybe looks like the bad guy or girl.
Yep.
And, just because your church might decide to, hey, we're starting to have service on this day, doesn't mean that everyone's going to come back on that day. I think people are going to slowly start feeling more and more comfortable over time. So to re-enter, different spaces. So the policies and things that are put in place now, leaders need to be reminded of in 2 weeks. Yeah. And then in 4 weeks, and then continuing out for a while, because sometimes we get in a rhythm and we become comfortable and we start dropping our guard a little bit because we're like, oh, okay, came back last time and I was fine. And, you start becoming more comfortable, but it might be helpful for a while to keep those expectations at a leader's forefront, because people are going to slowly come back. And if someone comes back in a month or two, and then they see this sort of engagement, parents could say, no way, my child is not coming back because the things that you all said were going to be in place are not in place.
That's good.
Mm-hmm. But I know there are some families, a youth worker in New York said that he's got a family of 6 living in a 2-bedroom apartment. And those kids are just itching to go anywhere. So if your church was open, they'll be there, right? And we might have some students who are in some not so happy homes who will be rushing back to our church campuses. And we have parents who maybe don't really care, or maybe not know where they are, or, just the gamut of families, right? And so I think as a youth worker, you need to be prepared to have your leaders prepared for all of those things.
Yeah. All right. Before we wrap up this conversation, any kind of quick last minute thoughts or quick ideas that we didn't have a chance to talk about yet?
I think if you're just looking for something to read and to train and equip yourself so that you can better equip your leaders, we have a really great book called When Relationships Matter. In fact, Chef is an author of that book. And if you have seen the holes in your team where they did not elevate the relationship between them and the student, this book will create the why behind that. And I think it's a really great book for you to be reading right now, you, the youth worker, be reading right now, so that when you do have an opportunity to train, it's at the forefront of your mind.
That's great. Great idea.
I think, we have a guy that runs around Orange. His name is Joel Manby. He's so wise. And in this situation, what everybody wants is certainty. And that's what we can't, and I've been using this line a ton. I was like, I know you want certainty, and I can't provide certainty because of these times, but let me give you some clarity on how I'm thinking. And, we don't have answers yet. Right now, we're in the phase of thinking through all the possibilities and trying to prepare for all those. And that's what we should be doing. And as more clarity comes, we can become more certain. But I love using that line. I know you would like some certainty. I can't give you certainty right now, but I can give you clarity on how I'm thinking about it.
All right, to wrap things up, I want to do something a little bit different because this has been such a weird and unclear and challenging and difficult time for ministry reasons and for personal reasons and for all sorts of things. And so I would just love to give each of you an opportunity to encourage the youth leaders and the student leaders and the pastors and the volunteers and everybody who's listening to this. So I would love for you just to take a minute and just encourage them where they are in the midst of what we've been going through together.
Well, I'll say this. If you feel as if you do not know what to do, you're in good company because none of us do. We are all winging it. We might know ministry, but we don't know what it's like to go through ministry and to lead ministry in the middle of a pandemic, especially one like this. We're all winging it the best that we can. And if you might have listened to this and thought, man, I dropped the ball when it came to, engaging my small group leaders, or I dropped the ball when it came to, making sure that my students, have whatever they might need. It's okay because you can start over today, right? And then offer yourself a little bit of grace because they were going through a pandemic, but you were too. You were a part of this too. And this has been a very real thing in your life, just as it has been a very real thing in their life. So offer yourself some grace. And if there are some leaders who might not have been leading in the way that you wanted them to lead, you might want to offer them a little bit of grace too, because though we are all experiencing in the middle of a pandemic, we all experienced it and engaged it very, very differently. We all are in much different places about it. So just offer yourself some grace, offer others some grace. And if you feel like, you don't know what to do, just maybe talk with some more people, keep listening to some podcasts, find a community. And I think, Brett will talk about some other ways too, for you to help navigating this time.
I think I would just say that, though it might not seem like it because of the responses you may be getting, you reaching out to kids, you sending a postcard, you just being on a Zoom call matters more than you think it does, or matters more than it feels like. And it matters more than the thank you letters you're getting from students because they don't send those. So, just know that you matter more than you think you do or more than it feels like, and just keep it up.
That's good.
Kind of want to piggyback a little bit on what Candace said, that you, the youth worker, have been through a pandemic. And have you thought about yourself lately? I know you've had a big learning curve. You have been more than the youth worker. You've also been the slide spell checker, the tech person, all the things. And so maybe just love on yourself a little extra in the coming days.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all so much for that encouragement and for helping us kind of brainstorm what this looks like. Because Candace, what you said is so right. Like, we're all just kind of making this up. Like, nobody here has been like, oh yeah, in my last ministry,
My last pandemic. Yeah.
Yeah. And here's what we did at my last ministry when everything shut down for 70 days. So we're all just kind of, making it up as we go. And I think it is important that we don't try to do this by ourselves and assume that we're on an island with this. And I guess one last little question, just a rhetorical question for you who are listening to think about. Of all the things we talked about, what might need to change in your week for some of these things to actually start happening? We try to be intentional not to get too salesy on this podcast, but we do all work for a company that has some unbelievable strategy and resources like XP3 Middle School and XP3 High School that we want to do everything that we can do to free you up to do these kind of things. So in the midst of trying to figure out what the content is or Zoom calls and social media and all of these different pieces, we would love to be able to partner with you, to be a part of your team, to help you do those kind of things. And we'd love to also continue these kind of conversations as we start thinking about the health and safety guidelines of what it looks like to start in phase 1 or phase 2 or coming back to this or coming back to that. And so stay tuned for more conversations that we're going to be having about that. You can hear more about that at orangestudents.com. And we would love for you to kind of just continue in this journey with us as we kind of walk through this together and try to figure out what in the world of ministry looks like right now, what these next steps are, because we are not in it alone. We are in the midst of this together. So Candace, Charlie, Chef, thanks so much for hanging out with us, for sharing your hearts, for sharing your thoughts. And thank you so much for watching, listening. We are praying for you. We are cheering for you. And we want to do everything that we can to help. So let us know how that is. And we'll see you next time.